Test, test, test.
Yep. Yep.
Three, test.
Great, thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Rob Fleming, the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure for the province of BC, and I'm speaking today from the territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. And with me here is Premier John Horgan and the President and CEO of the Wilson Group of Companies, Mr. John Wilson. And joining us virtually from Vancouver is Heather Bell, who is the Chair of the BC Aviation Council. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today for a very important announcement that will provide economic relief during this pandemic for intercity bus operators and regional airports. And I'll invite Premier Horgan to come up and announce the good news.
Thanks, Rob, and good afternoon, everyone. I, too, am grateful to be on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations, joined by Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure, Rob Fleming, John Wilson, the President of and CEO of Wilson's Transport, and many, many other things, but a local here on Vancouver Island, as well as Heather Bell in Vancouver. I want to thank, firstly, Heather and John for the work that they do with their companies and with the association to keep people moving. Critically, through COVID-19, we've had challenges about staying in place, and we've also had challenges about keeping contact at the same time. And although we see light at the end of the tunnel, we're encouraged by a whole host of initiatives, a reduction in the anxiety, broadly speaking, across BC. We also have some serious work to do, and I want to thank Heather and John for stepping up with us today as we talk about those challenges. As people have been staying close to home, that has had, of course, a profound impact on our inner city transportation network that we put in place when Greyhound vacated the field some years ago. And I want to thank Wilson's, as well as the others who have been providing transportation alternatives to people living in rural and remote parts of British Columbia. These operators have seen a drastic decline in their revenues as a result of people staying in place, but they've stayed in place themselves. They've hung in for the interest of the people in the region and the interest of British Columbia. The intercity bus operators and regional airports, of course, are particularly hard hit at this time, and they're absolutely resilient in their efforts to stay in place. And of course, we're going to need them as we come out of the challenges ahead of us. They've been connecting communities, they've been connecting people, and most importantly, they've been moving critical goods and services between communities across British Columbia. And that's why today, Rob and I are very pleased to announce that these essential transportation operators will be getting a little bit of help from the province of British Columbia. With respect to the intercity bus operators, our government is providing $10.7 million in operating grants to help them stay open and operating as we come out of the pandemic into the summer and into the fall. With respect to regional airports that provide medical evacuations and other important essential services to people in rural and remote parts of BC, we're providing $16.5 million in operating grants so we can maintain terminals, runways, and other operations at these critical pieces of infrastructure. In total, $27 million to help these critical operators stay in place. I'm going to ask John to step up and talk about how this will affect his company and intercity travel. And later we'll have Heather have a few words to say about how this will affect airports across British Columbia. But I want to put this in some context. You'll remember that earlier in the pandemic, working with the federal government, we were able to find $1 billion for BC Transit, TransLink, and BC Ferries. Critically important pieces of transportation infrastructure, but not the whole game. Were it not for our regional airports, were it not for the intercity bus services that John and other companies provide, massive parts of British Columbia would have been left without any hope. I want to thank those companies for staying in place, and I'm hopeful that this contribution today will help them get through the next number of months as we build recovery that will keep everyone in mind as we go into the fall and into 2022. So, John, I invite you to say a few words.
Thank you for the introduction, Premier Horgan, and thank you to both yourself and Minister Fleming for having me here today for this exciting announcement. Today is filled with a sense of overwhelming gratitude and relief, both for the intercity ground transportation sector across the province, but more importantly for the members of our rural, remote, and Indigenous communities that rely on these services. Next week will mark 1 year since our family business, much like many other businesses across British Columbia, had to make some of the most incredibly difficult decisions surrounding our operations due to the growing COVID-19 crisis. Throughout this pandemic, I have often referred to the quote, "We may be all in the same storm, but we're all in different sized boats." My team and I have worked tremendously hard in the advocacy efforts to shed light on the devastating losses that has left many in the ground transportation sector drowning. Today's grant announcement is the life raft many of us in our industry have been hoping for. The intercity bus sector is one of Canada's oldest, most affordable, and reliable modes of transportation. These privately owned businesses provide an essential, safe mode of transportation, especially for those living in rural areas across the province. At Wilson's, we know how important our services are to Island First Nations and other communities. We also know the devastating effects the loss of a service like ours can have, which is why our announcement in January to suspend service indefinitely was not a decision that was made lightly and has weighed heavily on our team since. With this announcement of this grant, I'm pleased to say that we will be looking at restarting services in the coming weeks to ensure Vancouver Island once again has the connectivity that so many members of the communities need. In closing, I would like to thank each and every one of you that have shown their support to our family and our business during this incredibly difficult time. The support from all over Vancouver Island, British Columbia, and beyond has been heartwarming, and we would not be here where we are today without you. I would also like to thank again Premier Horgan, Minister Fleming, and his team at the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure for listening to the people of British Columbia and stepping up to help save these essential services. We look forward to continuing to serve the communities of British Columbia for many more years to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John, for your comments, and thank you, Premier Horgan, for getting us underway and making the announcement. Making sure that British Columbians have access to essential services is important for our government, especially as we continue to go through the challenges of COVID-19. And I want to thank Mr. Wilson and his company, his family, for working collaboratively with us as a government, making the case as he did on the need for this funding, and for helping us shape the details of today's announcement. I'm very, very pleased to hear that this funding will help support your business and the thousands of British Columbians who rely on the service that you provide across many, many communities here on the island and other parts of the province. The applications for the funding start immediately, today in fact, and I have good odds that Mr. Wilson will be the first applicant by the end of business today. But it will be open to all intercity bus operators across BC, and our team will be reaching out to them following this announcement to direct their attention to how they can make those applications. It's now my great pleasure to announce Heather Bell from the BC Aviation Council, who's joining us from Vancouver, to speak specifically about the funding announcement today that will support regional airports that provide essential medical services to British Columbians. So over to Heather in Vancouver.
Thank you, Minister Fleming. The British Columbia Aviation Council would like to thank yourself and Premier Horgan on behalf of all of our regional airports for this much-needed support. We know that the aviation industry as a whole has been one of the hardest hit sectors in this pandemic. What many people don't know is that the aviation industry in Canada is funded almost fully in a user pay model. So it doesn't take much imagination to see that with air travel at a near standstill, the revenues in this industry have also hit rock bottom. All the while, high costs for maintaining regulatory and safety standards remain. Prior to the pandemic, this industry was in a 10-year surge. We were seeing situations where we had a fear that we didn't have enough people to fill all the positions in the aviation industry. We were short of pilots, air traffic controllers, airport operations, maintenance engineers. And while we don't believe that is the case right now and is not a fear right now, I think we will see that in the very near future. As Premier Horgan said, we see a light at the end of this tunnel. And I believe when air travel comes back, it's not coming back as a flood, but it's going to come back as a tsunami. And we strongly urge the federal government to follow up on this much-needed assistance with further targeted and flexible assistance for the entire aviation industry, so that our industry is strong and ready and able to ride that wave. Aviation is a primary economic driver for our province and for our country. It needs help, it needs our support, and we need to make sure it remains strong. So again, I would like to thank Premier Horgan and the government for this much-needed support. More help is needed, and I hope that's on the way. Back to you, Minister Fleming. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Heather. Really glad to hear that this funding will help support the safe operation of regional airports across the province that provide vital medical services to the people of BC. And let me just say in conclusion today with this announcement that this funding is about supporting each other as British Columbians in regions right around our province in all our diversity. It's about protecting the services that people rely on in time of need, and it will support operations and the continuation of services over the entirety of the next year into 2022. Helping these businesses and regional airports operate, recover, and build back stronger is the goal of today's funding announcement. I want to thank again John Wilson for participating here. I want to thank the BC Motor Coach Coalition as well, and Heather, to thank you again on behalf of the BC Aviation Council. This is an unprecedented time, and while we can see the light at the end of the tunnel with the introduction of vaccines, people and businesses still need help to recover from the economic strain that COVID-19 has caused, and our government is committed to being responsive both to the needs of people, to businesses, and to communities that need our help, just so that we can see this through to the end of the pandemic and into a strong economic recovery for all British Columbians. And I know that together we will get through it. We've identified a significant gap here today for some businesses that were particularly exposed to travel restrictions during this pandemic. They needed our help. We've worked with them collaboratively to provide that, and I'm very pleased to be able to make this announcement today with Premier Horgan. And we're at the end of the announcement, and I think we're going to go to questions and answers.
Thanks, everyone. A reminder to reporters on the line, please press *1 to join the queue. Our first question today comes from Binder Sajan, CTV.
Hi, Premier. You were making the good news announcement that mass vaccination for the general public was starting yesterday. With the failure at Vancouver Coastal Health in terms of actually getting appointments booked, how are you owning this, and will you be apologizing to the public?
Well, certainly we were disappointed with the results in Vancouver Coastal yesterday. We have other health authorities that did very, very well, making sure that those over 90 years old had appointments made. Some 15,000 already booked of the 50,000 we expect to do throughout the week. But certainly we're disappointed with the results in Coastal Health, and Minister Dix has taken responsibility for that on behalf of the government and the service provider. I also understand has made comment just in the past few minutes. So I'm confident that we're on the right track. I think British Columbians should take comfort in the fact that we are preparing to get through phase 2 and get as quickly as we can to phase 3. I think it also connects into the announcement that we've made today. If we are going to come out of the pandemic stronger than we went in, we need to make sure that not just the vaccine process rolls out in a safe and effective manner, but also that the infrastructure that we all depend on, whether it be our airport infrastructure across BC or the intercity bus network that has been struggling because we have been, as British Columbians, listening to the call of Dr. Henry and staying in place. As we come out and get back to more normal activity, we're going to need everybody pulling together, just as we pulled together to get to this point. With respect to yesterday and the call center, profoundly disappointed, take full responsibility for that. That's the responsibility of government to make sure that we have the right people and infrastructure in place. And we're taking steps, as you've already heard from Minister Dix and others, to correct that today and throughout the rest of the week, and indeed throughout the rollout of the vaccination program.
Binder, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, and just wondering if you can, you said the issues are being worked on. Minister Dix also outlined that for us. Can you guarantee that these kinds of issues won't keep creeping up as we go through this registration process?
Well, we had 1.7 million calls yesterday at the same time that we were opening up BC parks. The BC Parks Network worked very effectively because we had the experience of last year to fall back on. We now have the experience of yesterday in Vancouver Coastal. We have the positive outcomes in Fraser Health. So we are having the health authorities talk to each other. Adrian is overseeing that with Dr. Penny Ballum and Dr. Bonnie Henry to make sure that we correct the shortcomings of yesterday so that we're better tomorrow. I know all British Columbians understand that when you're undertaking the largest immunization program in BC history, there will be some bumps along the road. And the good news is it was day one, and we have many, many days ahead of us. And I think all British Columbians are focusing on how quickly they can get their loved ones vaccinated and then themselves as we get back to more normalcy as we move into the summer.
Our next question is from Richard Zisman, Global.
One, you mentioned the success at Fraser Health. Fraser Health had success because they had an online booking system. Was it completely unacceptable that the province was not prepared to have online booking systems in every health authority? And why, when Fraser Health was working on an online system, were the other health authorities not doing the same?
Well, as you know, Richard, every part of British Columbia is different. Every health authority has different issues that they have to address throughout not just the pandemic, but regular operations of our acute care system and all of the other health services that are provided across British Columbia. I think we've acknowledged fairly clearly that we had a failure of a contractor yesterday, and steps are being taken to correct that.
Richard, do you have a follow-up?
But there was a failure from the province as well of not working with health authorities to create an online portal. But I also need to ask about easing of restrictions. Dr. Henry mentioned yesterday that we may have church services in person in Easter. That seems very early for some. Saskatchewan has announced they're easing today, even though there's an increase in variant cases. We have an increase in variant cases here. Are we not moving too soon to talk about easing restrictions when we start seeing this spike in variant cases?
Well, again, Dr. Henry and her team have been providing advice to government and to British Columbians for a year now, and we've fared fairly effectively as a result of that. I know that we established a table for faith leaders, multi-denominational, run by Rabbi Robert Dahm through the WASC Center in Vancouver, and we've been working with all denominations from all imaginable faiths on how we can best get back to in-person worship. That process has been months long, and it informs Dr. Henry and informs government on the decisions that we'll make going forward. I believe that the optimism that Dr. Henry has, I share, that by the time we get to the end of this month and into April and the season for many denominations, whether it be Passover, Vaisakhi, Ramadan, or Easter, just to name a few, that people will be looking forward to coming together in small numbers, to be sure, but coming together to acknowledge and recognize these important spiritual moments in the faiths of all British Columbians, and then looking, I think, optimistically towards the summer and a return to normal activity.
Our next question is from Tanya Fletcher, CBC.
The call volume issues. You said earlier to another question, you said other health authorities did very, very well. But from what I understand, that's only because those other health authorities put in place their own call center backup support that they did have to rely on in the end. So if Vancouver Coastal Health was the only one that didn't have a contingency plan, and that's why they failed so badly, whose fault is that? Is that on the health authority or is that on the province?
Well, I mean, you can blame whoever you want to blame, quite frankly. We had a bad day yesterday, we being all British Columbians that live in Vancouver Coastal Health. We're taking steps today to correct that. Other parts of British Columbia, other health authorities had contingency plans that weren't in place in Vancouver Coastal. They will be in the next number of hours. The contractor was a highly regarded and respected contractor. We had every expectation that they would be able to meet the conditions of their contract. They didn't. They acknowledged that, and I think we need to move on. I'm happy to accept responsibility and blame for this if that's what British Columbians are seeking, but I think more importantly, British Columbians are seeking vaccinations. We have more products now approved by Health Canada. We have more product coming to British Columbia, and we have a system in place that failed on making a booking yesterday, but we continue to vaccinate British Columbians, over 300,000 already, and hundreds of thousands of more before the end of this month.
Tanya, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, thanks. Going back to the lack of online booking opportunities, online booking portals are currently running in Yukon and Nova Scotia, and they were built by an Ottawa-based tech firm, Can Immunize. They were contacted by other provinces as well. It's unclear if BC was one of them. But did the other health authorities here not have a portal because they tried to design one in-house and they just couldn't get it done in a timely way? Or did they try to hire an outside contractor? Is there any indication of what was going on with each individual health authority and if it's solely on them to get that up and running?
Well, I think that would be a better question for Minister Dix, who has been overseeing this from the Ministry of Health. I do know that we have full confidence that we'll be able to deliver vaccines to British Columbians through phase 2 and into phase 3 in the weeks ahead. Where we're going to see significant volumes will be in April when we move to phase 3. We're dealing this week with those 90 years of age and older. We did not anticipate 1.7 million calls for that small cohort of British Columbians. We should have been better prepared. We've acknowledged that. And the terms of each health authority putting in place their infrastructure is entirely up to them. And we oversee that and manage it in the best interests of British Columbians. And I think that we'll see, again, over time. I appreciate that today's the day we talk about the failure in coastal health, but I think we should also talk about the exciting opportunities that will flow from this for many, many British Columbians as they get vaccinated and we start returning to normal. That's what British Columbians want. And are they frustrated by in coastal health by the challenges with the call center? Absolutely. So am I.
Our next question is from Scott Weston, CTV Vancouver Island.
The question is for Minister Fleming. It was suggested that Mr. Wilson from Wilson Transportation on Vancouver Island may be the first one to get an application. I'm just wondering, Rob, when and how soon can transportation providers like, for example, Wilson Transportation and the Nanaimo Regional Airport look at receiving their grant?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. And as I mentioned, applications open today for inner-city bus providers. We're also reaching out to the 57 airports that are included in the grant program, communities around British Columbia. So we're being proactive. We will guide those companies and those airports, which are traditionally or typically municipally owned or nonprofit societies, to walk them through the grant process. The intention is to have all the money out the door that's been announced today, the $27 million, done by March 31st. And the scale of this grant is to sustain operations for companies like Mr. Wilson's and for some of our airports around British Columbia for the next year, so well into the winter and spring of 2022.
Scott, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, I do. You identified, I believe the Premier said that how critical the Wilson service is to First Nations people and other people in rural communities on Vancouver Island. Is there a way that can be expedited? Because right now they're without a transportation system, and I know Judith Sayers, the president of Chalmers, has expressed concern about especially Indigenous women not having a safe transportation system on the island.
Yeah, no, thank you for the follow-up. And as I said, we will flow the money immediately. We're beginning the application period today. We'll work with companies. It's a simple, very efficient grant application process. So companies will be able to take advantage of this almost immediately and make operational plans, those that have suspended or reduced services, to resume those services. But I think the point, and the Premier said it well earlier in this press conference, our government has a lot to be proud of. We worked very, very quickly when Greyhound left Western Canada and stopped and suspended their operations entirely. And we worked with private companies like the Wilsons Group to look at the 27 routes that serve inner-city bus-connected rural and remote communities in BC. We also created a brand new entity called BC Bus North, which serves very sparsely populated northern communities. Those operations have been maintained entirely during the pandemic. So We realize that some of the private companies that are operating intercity bus routes have waited for good signs for business to return, but British Columbians, in honoring the advice of the Provincial Health Office, have not participated in non-essential travel. So it really wasn't possible to rebuild revenues any other way. Companies like the Wilson's Group have tried. They've been responsible companies. They needed our help. We listened. We worked with them to shape this grant program. And it's good news, I think, for all of the intercity bus operators around the province today.
Our next question is from Rob Shaw, Check News.
Oh, hi, Minister, and I guess Premier. Why did it take so long to do this transportation grant? I remember the first story from Wilson's being in October, and we're 5-6 months later, just kind of rolling this out. What was the hesitancy on behalf of the province to do this in the fall?
Thank you, Rob. I don't think there was any hesitancy. I think what a lot of companies had hoped for and were beginning to see last July and August, when we didn't have the health restrictions in place that we do today, when people were traveling and participating in sustaining domestic tourism around BC, when non-essential travel, if you like, was permitted, is they began to see some hopes of a recovery. But as we got into the winter months and especially by the turn of this new year, I think companies were beginning to look ahead and understand that there was uncertainty about when they may be able to increase ridership again, what the summer tourism season might look like this summer. Now, there are reasons to be hopeful again. We've created a grant program that will allow companies, in some cases they've seen a 95% ridership decline, to have a grant as we build back ridership levels. This grant is designed for an entire year so that we can give companies a fairly long period of time to recover those opportunities. And it was really a discussion with the Motor Coach Coalition and individual bus operators about how can we best configure a program, create a program out of thin air, if you like, and not for the first time during this pandemic, to help specifically hard-hit businesses that occupy this business space in British Columbia.
Rob, do you have a follow-up?
Sure, thanks. To the Premier, I guess now that we have transportation companies covered off with aid, regional airports, and there's another redraft of the small business grant program, the sort of remaining sector, one of the remaining sectors you spoke about a couple of weeks ago was the large tourism operators, Butchart Gardens. Haven't heard anything from your government on that. Are they going to have to wait till the budget in mid-April, or what's the latest on what's being considered for them?
We're looking at a whole range of options for the larger operators, whether they be large hotel chains or large hotel operations and attractions like Butchart Gardens, which of course for Czech viewers is something that is very close to all of our hearts. But these projects we'll be looking at the month of March to see, as we've talked about today, what the future holds for more people showing up. How much will they be needing? How many staff will they be able to bring back to keep the operations going? These are decisions that are made in the private sector based on what they see as the trends. And you heard Heather talk about how vital the airport infrastructure is, not just to our medical health teams to evacuate and to get critical supplies into remote areas, but also to provide tourism opportunities. So all of this stuff is coming together. It will obviously, by budget day, we'll have well established where we're going and working with the operators. I think Rob touched on the biggest difference, I think, between now and any other time in our history is there was not something on the shelf saying, oh, here's your program for when an entire economy disappears. Here's the program to make sure that these businesses can continue going forward. Here's the program you want to implement when you want to vaccinate 5 million people. So we have been creating these initiatives within government for the past 12 months, not just in the transportation sector, not just in the tourism sector, not just for small and medium-sized businesses, but right across the board on the economy side. On the social side and on the delivery of services, we've been doing the same thing. I'm fiercely proud of what the professional public service has done in collaboration with the private sector, in collaboration with communities to get us to this enviable place now where we can look with some hope towards a summer that does not involve constantly talking about restrictions, constantly talking about how COVID-19 has affected our lives. I'm hopeful that as we get to the graduating class of 2021, that they will have something to celebrate when they leave their high school careers and move on to other parts of their adult life. This is what I'm thinking about every day. Has it been challenging to get to this point? Absolutely. But there was not a roadmap. We have been creating this in collaboration with communities and people from the beginning, and I'm quite proud of what we've been able to accomplish together.
Next question is from Andrew Duffy, TC.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up to what Rob asked. There's been such a focus on small and medium businesses in terms of their relief packages in the tourism and hospitality industry. Why is that, and why weren't the larger companies looked at until later?
Well, as John said in his remarks, we have all been in a storm the likes of which we've never seen before. But not everyone is in the same size boat. Not everyone is in the same set of circumstances. So government has looked almost literally on a case-by-case basis to make sure that we're designing the best possible outcome for a particular sector or a particular industry within or operation within a sector. That's been the challenge, and we have met that challenge on most days.
Andrew, do you have a follow-up?
I do, just a quick one. I know this is a sort of a one-time program, but is there a mechanism in place? I know we're all trying to be positive and looking at the summer as a possibilities and unicorns and all that kind of stuff, but what if things don't go well? Is there a mechanism in place by which this kind of funding could be topped up?
Well, absolutely. Again, from the beginning, last year, we worked to put $10 billion into the provincial economy between budgets, unprecedented. Again, there was no roadmap for that. Some of the programs were taken up on quickly, some were not, and we've had to repurpose, put in different criteria. Those are well covered by the public press. And in this instance, if this is insufficient, we'll revisit it. Nothing is more important than connecting communities. Nothing's more important than making sure people can travel safely. Rob touched upon the Northern Bus Service that was part and parcel of the Highway of Tears and the deaths of Indigenous women along Highway 16. We as a society made a commitment to make sure we were going to protect people to the best of our ability, and that's what this program is about today. How do we get the intercity bus system up and running again in a way that will be profitable for the operators, but also providing that valuable service to people? When it comes to our airport infrastructure, it's not just the tarmac and the terminal, it's also the carriers. So we need to work, as we have been, and Heather touched upon this, with the federal government to make sure that the providers, whether it be Harbour Air, whether it be Helijet here in the Lower Island, whether it be companies like WestJet, Air Canada, Pacific Coastal, have in place plans so that they can start up effectively. Heather talked about skills shortages that we were contemplating not that long ago. We're not contemplating skills shortages now. We're contemplating how do we bring people back together, get our infrastructure working again, making sure that people will be able to move around British Columbia. And more importantly, when we open up our borders, again in collaboration with the federal government, will we be prepared for the influx of people who will want to return to British Columbia or come for the first time?
Our last question today is from Dominique Levesque, Radio Canada.
As we look into the summer, British Columbians want to make plan. What kind of directives are you giving British Columbian about travel inside the province?
Well, it's premature to talk about travel in the summer, other than to have people look at their calendars and their holidays and the destinations that they want to visit. I would suggest that people will be making their own choices and decisions about that. Dr. Henry's orders are still in place. I don't want to preempt her by giving false hope, but we have both, she and I have been saying with some enthusiasm that the summer will be safer this year than last year, and we're hopeful that we will get back to regularly scheduled programming at that time. But again, I don't want to preempt Dr. Henry. The people of British Columbia have listened intently to her. That was deliberate. We wanted to make sure the expert was talking directly to British Columbians over the past 12 months, and I don't want to preempt her other than to say to British Columbians, start thinking about better days because they're just around the corner.
Dominique, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, please. And for the tourism industry that is suffering, obviously, inside or those welcoming tourists from other places, will there be some financial aid or for those welcoming tourists from outside, or are we letting people come?
We're working right now through the Ministry of Tourism, Arts and Culture and Sport, as well as Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation, on making sure that there are programs that companies can access when the restart takes hold. But as Dr. Henry has said, it's not going to be the flick of a switch. It's going to be a gradual turning of the dial. I think that is frustrating for some, but that's the reality I think all British Columbians and indeed all Canadians are living with right now. There's going to be some trepidation, I would say, when the announcement comes that we have achieved a herd immunity or we have sufficient people vaccinated that we can get back to normal behavior. I think the past 12 months have been so profound for the lives of British Columbians, it's going to take some time for people to get back into a mindset where they're going to go into public places with abandon and enthusiasm. But I hope that day's not far off. And when it's here, I think there will be a collective sigh of relief from the people of BC. I know there certainly will be a collective sigh of relief from all of us here at the Legislative Assembly.
Thanks, everyone. That's all the time we have.
Thank you.